Oral Teaching and Eurythmy. From what I have said already, you may now understand the goal of Waldorf education. It intends to bring up children to become strong and sound in body, free in soul, and clear in spirit. If children are to live in future society, it is most important that they have strong, healthy bodies, free souls, and clear spirits. And to educate in this way, teachers must have a thorough mastery of the principles I have tried to describe. Teachers must have a complete vision of the child's makeup, one that enables them to assess physical health. Only those who can truly judge physical health and harmonize it with the soul can understand the needs of each child as an individual. It is accepted today that a doctor should have access to schools, and the system of school doctors is growing. However, we do not give the responsibility of teaching different subjects to various teachers who have no contact with one another, and neither should we give the responsibility of physical health to someone who is not a member of the staff or a member of the College of Teachers. Such a situation presents a particular difficulty, which the following incident illustrates. Once, when we were showing visitors to the Waldorf school, there was one gentleman whose official capacity was inspector of schools. I was speaking of the children's physical health, about their organism and what one could observe in it, and I told him about one child who has a heart disorder, and another with some other disability, and so on. Then the man exclaimed in astonishment, "But your teachers would need medical knowledge before this could be of any use in the school." Well, yes, if teachers need a certain amount of medical knowledge for a healthy education, then they must learn this. Life cannot be skewed to suit people's idiosyncrasies. We must establish our organization according to the requirements of life. Just as we must study before we can work in other areas, we must learn before we can do something in education. Thus it is necessary, for example, that teachers see precisely all that takes place when a small child plays. Play involves a whole constellation of soul activities: joy, sometimes pain, sympathy, antipathy, and especially curiosity and a desire for knowledge. Children want to investigate the objects they play with and see what they are made of. When we observe this free and entirely spontaneous expression of soul, still unconstrained into any form of work, we must look at the shades of feeling and whether it is satisfying. When we guide children's play toward contentment, we improve their health by promoting an activity that is indirectly connected with the digestive system. And the way a person's play is guided during childhood can determine whether a person's blood circulation and digestive system become congested in old age. There is a delicate connection between the way a child plays and the growth and development of the physical organism. One should not say that the physical organism is unimportant or claim to be an idealist and unconcerned with our lowly physical organism. The physical organism was brought into the world by divine spiritual powers. It is a divine creation, and we must understand that as educators we are called on to cooperate in this spiritual creation. But I would rather express my meaning through a concrete example than use abstract statements. Suppose children show an extreme pathological form of what we call a melancholic disposition, or imagine an extreme pathological form of the sanguine temperament. The teacher must know where the border is between what is simply physical and what is pathological. If we see that a melancholic child is tending toward becoming pathological, and this happens far more often than one would think, we must contact the parents and inquire about the nature of the child's diet. We will discover a connection between that diet and the child's pathological melancholy. To give a concrete example, though there might be other causes, we will probably find that the child has been getting too little sugar at home. Because of this lack of sugar in the diet, the liver function is not regulated properly. A unique characteristic of melancholic children is that, whereas a certain substance, starch, is formed in the liver, it does not appear in the right amount. This substance may also be found in plants. Everyone forms starch in the liver, but it is not the same as plant starch. It is an animal starch, which is transformed directly into sugar in the liver. The transformation of animal starch into sugar is a very important activity of the liver. In melancholic children, this does not function properly, and we must advise the parents to add sugar to their diet. In this way, we can regulate the liver's glycogenic function. You will see an extraordinary effect from this purely hygienic measure. With sanguine children, you will find just the opposite. They are probably getting far too much sugar. They are given too many sweets and too much sugar in the diet. If they have developed a craving for sugar, in this case exactly the opposite liver activity will develop. The liver is an infinitely important organ, and it resembles a sense organ much more than one would imagine. The liver's purpose is to perceive the whole person from within, and it is vital to one's whole being. Thus its organization differs from that of other organs. In other organs, a certain amount of arterial blood enters, and a certain amount of venous blood flows out. The liver, however, has an additional arrangement, whereby a special vein enters and supplies the liver with extra venous blood. This has the effect of making the liver into a world of its own, so to speak, a world apart in the human being. It is this that enables us to perceive ourselves by means of the liver, that is, to perceive what affects our organism. The liver is an extremely fine barometer for sensing the sort of relationship human beings have with the outer world. You will effect an extraordinary improvement in pathologically sanguine children, those who are flighty and flit nervously from one thing to another, if you advise parents to diminish somewhat the amount of sugar in the diet. Thus a real teacher can, even beyond the classroom time, provide guidance that will make children truly healthy, strong, and active in their physical functions. And you will notice how important this is for developing the whole human being. Some of our most impressive experiences with children at the Waldorf School have been with those of 15 or 16. We began with 8 elementary classes, but we have added, class by class, the 9th, 10th, and now the 11th. These upper classes, which are, of course, more advanced than the elementary classes, are made up of children of 15 and 16, and they present certain difficulties. Some of these difficulties are of a soul and moral nature, which I will speak about later. But even in the physical sense, we find that human nature always tends toward the pathological, and has to be protected from this. Among girls, you might see a slight tendency toward chlorosis or anemia in the developing organism. The girl's blood becomes poor, and she becomes pale. This is because, from 14 to 16, the spiritual nature becomes separated from the organism as a whole, and it is this spiritual nature that previously regulated the blood, but now the blood is left to itself. Consequently, it must be properly prepared, so that it can accomplish this larger task on its own. Thus, girls are likely to become pale and anemic, and we must recognize this arises when we have failed to arouse a girl's interest in what we have been teaching or telling her. If attention and interest are kept alive, the whole physical organism participates in the activity which engages the inmost self of the person, and thus anemia does not arise in the same way. Footnote: chlorosis is also called green sickness, a benign type of iron deficiency anemia in adolescent girls, marked by a pale yellow-green complexion. End of footnote. When we can view human nature in this way, instead of denigrating the physical body, as teachers we can accomplish a great deal for the children's health. We must consider it a basic principle that spirituality becomes false as soon as it leads away from the material world to some castle in the clouds. If we denigrate the body because we consider it something low that must be suppressed, we will certainly not acquire the ability to educate in a healthy way. You see, you can forget about the physical body, and perhaps you can attain to a high state of abstraction in your spiritual nature, but it will be like a balloon flying away in the air. If spirituality is not connected to physical life, it cannot give anything to earthly social evolution. And before we can rise into the heavens, we must be prepared for the heavens, and this has to take place on earth. When people seek entry into heaven, they must pass the examination of death. And it is seldom the case in this materialistic time that people have spiritually nurtured the human physical organism, the highest creation of divine spiritual beings on earth. I will speak of the soul moral aspect in the next section, and on eurythmy following that. There is much to do in the physical realm, apart from the educational measures in the school itself. And the same is true of the realms of soul and spirit. The important thing is to encourage people, even while in school, to find a proper entry into life. Again, I will illustrate the aim of the Waldorf school by concrete examples, rather than abstract statements. It is deemed necessary at the end of a school year to review the work of a child during the year. For us, it usually takes the form of a report on the child's progress and attainment in the various subjects in relation to the assigned work. In many countries, parents and guardians are told whether the children have met the standard by means of grades, given as numbers, each indicating that a child has reached a certain proficiency in a given subject. Sometimes teachers are not certain that a 3 or 4 expresses the correct degree of achievement, so they write down 3.5. Some teachers make a fine art of such calculation, and even put down 3.25. I have to admit that I never acquired this fine art of expressing human abilities by using such numbers. The Waldorf school reports are produced in a different way. If the College of Teachers is unified to the degree that every child in the school is known to some degree by every teacher, it is possible to give a report that relates a child's whole nature. Thus our report on a child at the end of the school year resembles a short biography, an aperçu of one's experiences with that child during the year, both in and out of school. In this way, both the children and their parents or guardians have a reflection of what they are like at this age. At the Waldorf school, we have found that one can even put a severe reprimand into these mirror-like reports, and the children readily accept it. We also write something else in these reports. We combine the past with the future. We know the children, and we know where they are deficient in volition, feeling, or thinking. We know when one emotion or another is uppermost. And in the light of this knowledge, we make a little verse or saying for each individual child in the Waldorf school, and we include it in their reports. It is meant to be a guiding thought for the whole next year at school. The children learn their verses by heart and keep them in mind. They work on the child's volition, emotions, or mental peculiarities, modifying and balancing them. Thus the report is not merely an intellectual expression of what the child has done, but it has a power itself and continues to work until the next report. We must indeed become familiar with the individuality of each child very accurately, as you will see, if we are to give such a potent report each year. You can also see from this that our task in Waldorf education is not to establish schools that require exceptional external structure. We value the pedagogy and teaching which can be introduced into any school. And we appreciate the influence that external conditions have on education in any school. We are not revolutionaries who simply say that city schools are useless and that schools should be put out in the country and so on. On the contrary, we say that the conditions of life produce the situation, and we take the conditions as they exist. In every kind of school, we work for the welfare of humanity through a pedagogy that takes the given situation into account. Working along these lines, it seems we can dispense with the custom of holding some children back in the same class in an attempt to make them smarter. The Waldorf school has been criticized for having children in the upper classes whom the authorities judge should have been kept back. We find it exceedingly difficult, if only on humane grounds, to leave children behind. Our teachers are so attached to their children that many tears would be shed if we had to do this. The truth is, an inner relationship arises between the children and teachers, and this is the real reason we can avoid the unhappy custom of holding children back. Besides, there is no real reason to keep children back. Suppose we hold a girl in back a previous class. That girl may be constituted in such a way that her mind develops in her 11th year, and she would reach the class for 11-year-old children a year too late. This causes much more harm than the possibility a teacher might encounter extra work because the girl has less understanding of the subjects, though she must nevertheless be taught with the others in the class. The special class is reserved for children who are the slowest to develop. We have only one special class, which includes all the slowest children from the other classes. We have not had enough money for a variety of remedial classes, but this class has an exceptionally gifted teacher, Dr. Karl Schubert. When the question of establishing a special class came up, it was certainly obvious that he was the one to take this class. He has a special gift for it. He is able to make something of the pathological conditions of those children. He handles each child individually, so much so that he is happiest when he has them sitting around a table with him instead of on separate benches. The children are slow of mind or have some other deficiency. The children who are slow of mind or have some other deficiency receive a treatment that enables them after a while to rejoin their classes. Naturally, this is a matter of time, but we transfer children to this class only rarely, and any time I find it necessary to transfer a child from a regular class into the special class, I first have to fight it out with the class teacher, who does not want to give up the child. Often it is a wonderful thing to see the deep relationship that has grown between the individual teachers and children. It means that this education is truly reaching the children's inner life. It is all a matter of developing a method, for we are realistic, not some nebulous mystics. So, although we have had to make compromises with ordinary life, our method, nevertheless, makes it possible to bring out a child's individual disposition. At least we have had many good results in the first few years. And because we have had to make compromises under present conditions, it has been impossible to give religious instruction to many of the children. We can, however, give them moral training, and we begin this with the feeling of gratitude. Gratitude is a definite moral experience in relation to other human beings. Sentiments and notions that do not come out of gratitude lead to abstract precepts, at best, that regulate morality. But anything can come from gratitude, so from gratitude we develop the capacity for love and the feeling for duty. In this way morality leads to religion. But outer circumstances have prevented us from joining those who would take the kingdom of heaven by storm, so we have handed over the instruction in Catholicism to the Catholic community, who send us a priest of their creed. Thus the Catholic children are taught by a Catholic priest, and the evangelical Protestant children are taught by an evangelical pastor. The Waldorf school is not a school of life philosophy, but a means of education. It was discovered, however, that a certain number of children were dissenters and would receive no religious instruction under this arrangement. As a result of the spirit that came into the Waldorf school, certain parents, who otherwise would not have sent their children to a religion lesson, ended up asking us to extend the teaching of morality into the area of religion. It therefore became necessary for us to give special religious instruction from the standpoint of spiritual science, or anthroposophy. Even in these religious lessons, we do not teach spiritual science, but try to find symbols and parables in nature that lead toward religion. We try to bring the Gospels to the children in a way that will give them more spiritual understanding of religion and the like. Anyone who thinks the Waldorf school is a school for anthroposophy understands neither Waldorf education nor spiritual science. Spiritual science truly arises from all the sciences and from life, and did not need a name. But since this terrestrial world needs names for everything, it is called anthroposophy. But you cannot infer the scholar from the name. And similarly, just because we give anthroposophic religious instruction, you cannot assume that anthroposophy is introduced the way any other religious instruction might be from outside, as though it were a competing sect. How is spiritual science commonly understood? When people speak of it, they think of something sectarian, because at best they looked up the meaning of the word in the dictionary. This is like hearing the words Max Miller from Oxford and saying, "What sort of man is this? Perhaps a miller who bought corn and carted it to the mill to grind into flour and be delivered to the baker." Such a response to the name Miller would not say much about Max Miller, would it? The way people speak of anthroposophy, however, is just like this. It is like talking this way about Miller, spinning an opinion of anthroposophy based on the literal meaning of the word. People take it to be a sort of backwoods cult, whereas it is simply a fact that everything must have a name. Indeed, I mean no offense in this, but others have made a great deal of it. The instruction in religion, based on spiritual science, is increasing, and more children come to it. Some have even deserted other religious instruction to go to the anthroposophic religious lessons. It is quite understandable, therefore, that people should say that these anthroposophists are rather bad people, since they lead children to abandon their Catholic and Protestant religious lessons for the religious instruction based on spiritual science. We do all we can to discourage them from coming, because it is very difficult for us to find religious teachers in our own area. Nevertheless, despite the fact that we never planned on this instruction except in response to parents' requests and the unconscious requests of children, to my great distress, I might almost say, the demand for anthroposophic religious instruction constantly increases, and now, thanks to this anthroposophic religious instruction, the school has a completely Christian character. You can feel from the whole mood and being of the Waldorf school that a Christian quality pervades all the teaching and how religion is alive there. And this despite the fact that we never wanted to proselytize or connect the school with any church or sect. I have repeatedly said that the Waldorf principle does not establish a school to promote any particular philosophy of life, but to embody certain methods of education. Its goals are accomplished by a method based on knowledge of the human being. The goal itself is to help children become human beings who are sound in body, free in soul, and clear in spirit. Now let me say a little about the significance of teaching eurythmy and its value for children. To illustrate this, I would like to use these figures made in the Dornach studio. They are artistic representations of the essence of eurythmy. Their primary purpose is to help people appreciate artistic eurythmy, but I can also explain educational eurythmy with them. Eurythmy is essentially visible speech. It is not mime or pantomime, nor is it any art form of dance. When people sing or speak, they produce activity and movement in certain organs. The same movement that is inherent in the larynx and other speech organs can be extended and expressed in the whole human being. In our speech organs, movements are repressed and stopped. For example, an activity of the larynx that would manifest in this movement, representing ah, in which the wings of the larynx open out, is submerged in seed form. It becomes a movement into which the meaning of speech can be expressed, a movement that can then pass into the air and be heard. This is the original movement of ah, the essential movement of the inner human being, so to speak. This is the movement that comes from the whole human being when expressing ah. Thus, within every utterance of speech and song, there is an arrested movement in seed form. This seed wants to be expressed as movement by the whole human being. These are the forms of expression in movements, and they can be discovered. The larynx and other organs take different forms for the sounds ah, e, l, m, and likewise there are corresponding movements and forms of movement. These forms of movement are the expressions of will that otherwise exist in expressions of thought and in the volition of speech and song. The abstract element of thought in speech is removed, and all intended expression is transformed into movement. Therefore, eurythmy is an art of movement in every sense. Just as you can hear ah, you can also see it. And just as you can hear e, you can see it. In these figures, the shapes in the wood are intended to express the movements. The figures are constructed on a three-color principle. The basic color expresses the form of the movement. Just as feeling pervades the tones of speech, feeling comes into the movement. We do not just speak a sound, but also color it with feeling. We do this in eurythmy as well. In this way, a strong unconscious momentum plays into the eurythmy. If the eurythmist can bring this feeling into the movements in an artistic way, the audience will be affected by it as they watch. Also keep in mind that the veil a eurythmist wears serves to enhance the expression of feeling. It accompanies and moves with the feeling. This was brought out in the performance at Keble College. You see here, in the figures, that the second color is mainly in the veils, representing the feeling nuance in the movement. Thus you have a first fundamental color that expresses the movement itself, and a second primarily in the veil placed over it, which expresses the feeling. The eurythmy performer must have the inner strength to express the feeling in movement. It is like the difference between ordering someone to do something and making a friendly request. It is in the nuance or level of feeling. Just as an order is different from a request, this second color, expressed here as blue on a foundation of green, continues into the veil. This represents the feeling nuance in the language of eurythmy. The third aspect that is brought out is character, or a strong element of volition. This can be introduced into eurythmy only when a performer can experience the movements as they are made, thus giving them strong expression. The way performers position the head as they do eurythmy makes a great difference in the way they appear. Whether, for example, one keeps the muscles on the left side of the head taut, on the left of the head taut, and those on the right relaxed, this is expressed here, in another figure, by means of a third color. You see the muscles on the left of the head are somewhat tense, those on the right relaxed. Observe how the third color always indicates this here. You see the left side contracted and down over the mouth. Here, in another figure, the muscles of the forehead are contracted. This, you see, sets the tone of the whole inner character. It radiates from this slight contraction, for this slight contraction radiates throughout the organism. Thus the art of eurythmy is really composed of movement, expressed in the fundamental color, the feeling nuance, expressed by the second color, and volition. Indeed, volition is the basis of the whole art, but emphasized in a special way. When the intention is to exhibit the features of eurythmy, only those parts of the human being are selected that characterize eurythmy. If we had figures here with beautifully painted noses and eyes and beautiful mouths, they might be charming, but for eurythmy this is not the point. What you see painted, shaped, or carved here belongs solely to the art of eurythmy in the performer. A eurythmy performer does not need to make any particular facial expression. It doesn't matter. It goes without saying, of course, that a normal, healthy eurythmist would not make a disagreeable facial expression while performing a friendly gesture, just as one would not do when speaking. There is no goal of artistic facial expression independent of eurythmic expression. For example, a performer can perform the gesture for ah by rotating the eyes outward. This is allowed and in keeping with eurythmy. But it would not be appropriate to make dramatic, sweeping gestures as one does in mime. Though often required, especially in mime, when performing eurythmy they would merely be distortions of expression. In eurythmy everything must have the quality of eurythmy. So here we have a form of art that demonstrates only the part of the human being that is eurythmy. Everything else is eliminated. Thus we get an artistic impression, for each art must express only what is appropriate through its own special medium. A statue cannot be made to speak, so you must bring out the desired expression of soul through the shape of the mouth and face. Neither would it have worked here, in the Eurythmy figures, to paint human performers in a naturalistic way. They had to be painted as immediate expressions of eurythmy. Naturally, when I speak of veils, I do not mean that one will be able to change the veil with each letter expressed. One can find the mood of the poem, however, by trying the various feeling nuances for a poem as a whole, by entering its mood, which might be a feeling of the letter A or perhaps B. Thus one can perform the whole poem correctly, using a single veil. The same is true for color. I have established the veil form, color, and so on that may be combined for each letter. There must be a certain essential key in a poem, and this is provided by the color of the veil, and in general by the color combination as a whole. This must be retained throughout the poem, otherwise the performers would have to continually change veils. They would constantly throw off veils and change dresses, and matters would be even more complicated than they already are, and people would understand even less. In fact, however, once one has the fundamental key, it can be maintained throughout the entire poem, using only the movements themselves to express changes in letters, syllables, and moods. Now, since my aim today relates to education, I have arranged these figures according to the order in which children learn the sounds. The first sound they learn, while still quite young, is the sound ah. Then they continue approximately in this order, for naturally when children are involved there are many digressions. On the whole, however, the children learn the vowels in this order: ah, e, o, u. Let me read those again. I think I got them wrong. Ah, e, o, u. The usual order. Then when the children practice the visible speech of eurythmy, they come to do it in this order. And for them it is like a memory of what they felt when first learning the sounds of speech as little children, a rebirth at another level in the language of eurythmy. Let me read that again. And for them it is like a memory of what they felt when first learning the sounds of speech as little children, a rebirth at another level. In the language of eurythmy, children experience what they experienced earlier. It affirms the power of the word in them through the medium of their whole being. Then the children learn consonants in this order: M, B, P, D, T, L, N. There should also be an eng sound here, as in sing, but it has not yet been made. Then the letters F, H, G, S, R. That mysterious letter R has 3 proper forms in human speech, and it is the last one that children perfect. There is a lip R, a palatal R, and an R spoken in the back of the mouth. Footnote: this guttural R is characterized by a sound articulated in the back of the mouth, as the non-English velar fricative sound k. End of footnote. Thus in speech, and in the organ of speaking or singing, children learn something that can be taken into their whole being and developed as visible speech. If there is sufficient interest for this expressive art, we could make more figures. For example, figures for joy, sorrow, antipathy, sympathy, and other feelings that are all part of eurythmy. And it is not just grammar, but prose also comes into its own in eurythmy. We can make figures for all these. Then people could see how this spiritual soul activity has a definite value, both in education and as an art, since soul activity not only influences the way our physical body functions, but also develops our soul and physical organic nature. As for these eurythmy figures, They also serve in the study of eurythmy as an aid to the memory of our students. Do not imagine that eurythmy is easy and can be learned in a few hours. A eurythmist requires thorough training. Thus, these figures are also used by eurythmy students to help them go more deeply into their art. You can see there is much contained in the forms themselves, though they are carved and painted quite simply. Today I wanted to speak of the art of eurythmy, insofar as it forms part of the educational principle of the Waldorf School.